But what I'm going to try to convince you of in the next couple of lectures is that the more supervisors rely on rules and external incentives, the more the wisdom they need is endangered. Too many rules undermine the development of moral skill, and too much reliance on incentives undermines moral will. The next two lectures will illustrate how effects to make things better are actually making war on wisdom. I'll begin with an example. I call this the lemonade example. One day in the early spring, a father, a professor of archaeology at the University of Michigan, took his 7-year-old to a baseball game. A few innings into the game, his son asked for lemonade. The dad dutifully went to a concession stand to get some. Mike's Hard Lemonade, 5% alcohol, was all they had. The dad, having never heard of it, bought some and brought it to his son. While they were cheering on the Detroit Tigers, a security guard happened to notice the child sipping hard lemonade from the bottle. He immediately called the police. The police immediately called an ambulance. The ambulance rushed to the ballpark and then rushed the child to the hospital. He had no trace of alcohol in him, and the doctors were ready to discharge him. But no, not so fast. The police put the child in a Wayne County Child Protective Services foster home. They hated to do it, they said, but they had to follow procedure. County officials kept him there for 3 days. They hated to do it, but they had to follow procedure. Next, a judge ruled that the child could go home to his mom, but only if his dad left the house and checked into a hotel, the dad who had endangered the child by giving him Mike's Hard Lemonade. The judge hated to do it, but he had to follow procedure. After 2 weeks, the family was finally reunited. In telling this story on National Public Radio, Scott Simon observed that, quote, procedures may be dumb, but they spare you from thinking. And to be fair, procedures are often imposed because previous officials have been lax and let a child go back to an abusive household. And we all know the truth in this second piece of what Scott Simon said. Every year or two, there's a story in the newspaper about some horribly abused child who was under the watchful eye of Child Protective Services and somehow escaped detection enough to have been starved down to weighing 50 or 60 pounds. And right away, the response to that is, we can't let this happen ever again. And so a rule is put in place to make sure that this particular failure won't recur, but some other failure, of course, will. So here's an example, the lemonade story, where people respond to the failure to protect children with more and more procedures that police and judges have to follow. Here's another example. Let me remind you of Judge Forer, Judge Lois Forer. Remember way back when I talked about the case of Michael, who had stolen $50 from a taxi cab driver and the passenger. Typical offender, young black male, high school dropout without a job. He stole $50 from a cab driver while brandishing a toy gun. There was no doubt in Forer's mind, Judge Forer's mind, that he was guilty, but the penalty posed problems, she said. The prosecutor wanted a 5-year sentence. Pennsylvania's sentencing guidelines called for a 2-year sentence. She thought both of those were excessive.